Okay, welcome to our New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, April 16th, with Dennis Snelling. Dennis is going to be talking about the 1950 Philadelphia Whiz Kids, and he's going to be referencing the New York Giants in that quite a bit. So, should be a real good show tonight. And we have many of the Sabre chapters I invited who are in the Philadelphia area who I thought might enjoy this show tonight. If any of you men or women like what you see tonight and you want to get on my mailing list, just email me. We got a great group here of men and women, and it's might be worth it if you see something you like in the future. Next week, we have to do a Tuesday meeting. That should be the last Tuesday for a while with David Krell. David's going to be talking about the New York Giants on television, in the 50s, which should be, very, very interesting. And then we will start remembering Willie Mays in May, the month of May. We have two living New York Giants who are going to be joining us, Joe Marganeri and Jackie Brandt. So that should be really exciting. Both of them, as you know, are in their 90s, so it should be great, interesting evenings hearing them talking about their careers, about playing for the New York Giants, and being a teammate of Willie Mays. Anyway, tonight, this is Dennis's book. He'll be talking to us about it. So Dennis has spoken to us in the past. Dennis, welcome back to New York Giants Preservation Society.
Thank you for
The
having
floor
me.
is yours.
All right, thank you. So this will be a little different than from some other presentations because I am going to do some sidebars on relationships the Giants and Phillies had during this period of time, well, actually through their history, and try to do some of that along with talking about the Whiz Kids and what happened to them in the book itself. So the book's kind of divided into a first chapter, which is a history of baseball in Philadelphia up through 1942, including the Phillies, of course. The second section then is the building of the Whiz Kids in the mid to late 40s. The middle section is about the Whiz Kids season in 1950, and then after that, the aftermath of where they don't repeat and why, and what happened to all of them. So it's kind of divided up that way. Phillies and Giants go way back, really to the beginning of the National League. Their predecessors were both uh, members of the original National League in 1876, and both were expelled from the league. They were not having good seasons, were losing money, and they refused to finish out their schedule, so they're both kicked out. And that was that way for about 6 years. Then the American Association started as a rival to the National League and put teams in Philadelphia and New York. And so the National League responded by creating a two-team minor league called the Minor League Alliance. And it was teams from Philadelphia and New York. And they played each other and they played exhibitions. And they eventually became the Phillies and Giants in 1883 when they were brought into the National League. And they remained in that league through today, although the Giants not in the same place. Um, they had a pretty raucous history, especially during the McGraw years. John McGraw really, for some reason, did not like the Phillies. There were fights that he had on field with Phillies players. Uh, as early as 1906, there was a famous incident with Ad Brennan, the Phillies pitcher, who cold cocked McGraw and knocked him out after a game in 1913. Later that year, there was a riot in Philadelphia when an umpire, the Giants were complaining about white sleeves fans in center field, and the umpire tried to vacate the area, and the fans took exception and ended up in a riot where they chased the umpires and McGraw all the way to the train station. So they had quite a history. William Baker, who took over the team in 1913, was actually a New York police chief. So he had a New York background. He owned the team till 1930. So they'd had a lot of history. And the Phillies themselves had a history of lack of success. Um, They'd had some great players, especially in the late 1800s. They had an outfield where all three players hit 400 or better in the same season, and a fourth outfielder who batted more than 300 times, who also hit over 400, actually had the highest batting average of the four. But they never really had the pitching. Fans always turned out. They were always first or second in attendance. But by the beginning of the 1900s, they had two problems. One, they did not have ownership with a lot of money. Al Reach, the sporting goods magnate, had teamed with a man named John I. Rogers, and they had money behind the team, but they sold out in 1903, and the team went through a series of owners and really didn't have money to compete. And at the same time, the American League started, and the athletics uh, began having success in drawing fans away from Philadelphia. And of course, Connie Mack eventually became really the face of Philadelphia baseball. So the Phillies had an owner that came in named Horace Fogel, who was actually backed by the brother of the President of the United States, a guy named Taft, and the owner of the Cubs at the time were really backing Fogel secretly. And but Fogel put together a team that actually contended in the mid 19 teens. Um, but he didn't last either because, again, this problem Giants, he accused the National League of folding and trying to throw the pennant to the Giants in 1912. And the owners finally had enough of him and tossed him aside. But in the meantime, he had put together a team that won the pennant in 1915 for Philadelphia, which was the only Phillies pennant between 1883, when they started in the National League, and 1950, the period of this book. And they had lost that World Series to Boston 4 games to 1, losing the last 4 games all by 1 run every game. So the Phillies went through a period where they went through ownerships. William Baker didn't really put money into the team. He died, gave the team over to his secretary and her husband, who ran it for a while. And they were actually pretty good judges of talent, but they couldn't keep the team together, and eventually were forced to sell when they ran out of money in 1943. And then the team was sold to a man named William Cox, who lasted a year before getting kicked out of baseball for betting on his own team. And maybe against them, I don't know. But he was kicked out of baseball. He was one of the guys who was reinstated at the same time that Joe Jackson, Pete Rose, et cetera, were reinstated. And so the team ended up getting sold to Bob Carpenter, who belonged to the DuPont family. And Carpenter put his son in charge, Bob Jr., and they hired a friend of the family, Herb Pennock, the Hall of Fame pitcher. He wasn't Hall of Fame yet, but had been working for the Boston Red Sox. He became the general manager, and they decided to create a farm system, which the Phillies really didn't have, and to build talent from within instead of finding young talent and selling it off. So the next part of the book talks about that, where they find Richie Ashburn, they find Granny Hamner. One of the chapters deals with within 6 months, they signed Robin Roberts and Curt Simmons. Curt Simmons was the biggest bonus baby of his time, created quite a sensation. He signed for $65,000, which was the most ever at that time in 1947. And the Phillies actually signed him after taking the team from Philadelphia up to this little town in Egypt, Pennsylvania, on an off day. Bust them up an hour to play against this high school pitcher and mostly high school and local young guys from Egypt, Pennsylvania. And he battled them to a 4-4 tie, and they signed him right after that. There were several teams trying to sign him, and the Phillies won, sending a message that they wanted to compete. And Simmons dominated his minor league the rest of 47, and then broke in on the last day of the 1947 season against the New York Giants, and went the route defeating them in the final game of the season, and also holding Johnny Mize, who was tied with Ralph Kiner with 51 home runs on the season. Mize was actually moved up to leadoff in the order with the idea of trying to get an extra at bat uh, to pass Kiner. He didn't end up hitting a home run off of Simmons, who won the game, went the route and gave up just one run, and actually got Mize out for the last out of the game. And so Simmons and Roberts, along with these others, by 1949, there was kind of becoming a sense that this team was different, that the Phillies were different, and fans were getting excited. And at the same time, the Athletics were having a little bit of a renaissance. They actually had some good seasons in 48 and 49. And in 49, uh, the the Phillies finished third. They had another big incident with the Giants that ended up in the first forfeit in 7 years in the National League. It really didn't have to do with the Giants. It had to do with Richie Ashburn coming in and trying to make a catch and an umpire saying that he had trapped the ball. And it ended up being a big riot on the field between the Phillies and the umpires, and the fans got into it and started throwing things on the field. They couldn't get it under control, and the game was forfeited to the Giants in that case. But the Phillies came into 1950. There was a lot of people thinking they could contend, and but most people were still picking the Dodgers and Giants to be the main competitor, especially the Dodgers were seen as a favorite. They had won the pennant in 49, and so the 50 season was an interesting season in that the Phillies just kind of roared out to a big lead. Uh, they uh, really everybody was having a great year. They were coming off 1949, of course. The book also talks about Eddie Waitkus, who was nearly murdered. There was an attempted murder by Ruth Ann Steinhagen, a 19-year-old fan who had been infatuated with him since he was with the Cubs, and she lived in Chicago. And so she plotted to kill Eddie. And the first time that the Phillies came into Chicago, she was unable to do so because the hotel was sold out. So she had to wait for the second time in, and she ended up luring him up to the room, saying, I have an important message for you. I'm someone who knows you from the neighborhood or something. So he went up to see what was going on, thinking it was actually a practical joke. And she was most definitely insane. She was famous for having conversations with Eddie Waitkus as she'd walk down the street. Eddie Waitkus, of course, was nowhere there. She'd never actually met Waitkus. She'd just seen him as a player at the ballpark. And she had actually a friend of hers, to show you how different mental health is treated these days. Her mother knew that she wanted to kill Waitkus, but didn't think that much of it. Her friend went with her when she bought the gun that she ended up shooting Waitkus with. And her remark to the police were, yeah, we bought it. And I think the bullets were extra as far as the cost. So kind of a cavalier attitude. She didn't think anything would really happen. Um, so he had to recover during 49, which he was really lucky to have survived it. He ended up undergoing 4 operations, and he never really recovered mentally from it. It was a pretty tragic life after that, but he did recover, and was one of the big stories of 1950, making a comeback and allowed the Phillies to move Dick Sisler to left field. Sisler had been acquired a couple of years before by Bob Carpenter, shortly after Herb Pennock had died of a cerebral hemorrhage uh, in a meeting. So Carpenter kind of ran the team. There was no general manager from 1948 till about 1954 for the Phillies. But every move they were making was the right move. They were signing young talent. All of it was panning out. Almost all of their talent was homegrown, and they made a couple trades like for Sisler. And they did really unconventional things, like Ashburn was a catcher, and they moved him to the outfield. They had uh, Jim Constanti, who was a relief pitcher who was used as a relief pitcher in a way no relief pitcher had ever been used before. And he was an older player. He had actually broken in a couple of years before Boston, Cincinnati, but was hanging on by a thread in the minor leagues, and was saved actually by his next door neighbor, who was an undertaker and a bowler, and talked to Constanti about putting different spins on the ball, which kind of sounds familiar these days. We hear all about spin rates and things like that. Well, this was kind of what this guy said. Hey, you can put different spins on a bowling ball. Why couldn't you do that with a baseball? And Constanti, who really couldn't throw hard enough to break a pane of glass, the proverbial pane of glass, took to it, and this undertaker actually saved his career. And he would call him into Philadelphia every once in a while if he'd get off track. And Constanti he ended up winning the most valuable player award that year, and I think deservedly so. He really held that whole team together through a lot of problems that they had. So what was hanging over the Phillies? Uh, they had a lot of young pitchers, but they were doing well. They started out with an older pitching staff at the beginning of the year, but then worked in two rookies, Bob Miller and Bubba Church. And Kurt Simmons, who had struggled after that great game against the Giants, started coming through and had a great season. He was having an even better season than Robin Roberts was having. And both were trying to become the first 20-game winner since Grover Cleveland Alexander. The Phillies had not had a 20-game winner since 1917, and you're in 1950. They had plenty of 20-game losers. I think there were 8 different pitchers who had lost 20 or more, but none had won 20 or more. And so now they had a shot at having two players. But one problem was that Simmons was subject to call up if his National Guard unit was activated, and there was a great possibility of that with the Korean conflict starting to come into play. And he'd actually been called up for a couple of weeks in 1949. But in 1950, the concern was that his unit was going to get activated and he would have to go into the military. So the Phillies ended up, they went into August. They were leading the league pretty consistently by 7 or 8 games. And there was a very famous, one of the famous fights, there's actually a picture of it in the book, came against the Giants in 1950 and on August, started August 11th. And Andy Seminick, who is probably the heart and soul of the team on the field, the real leader of the team. So you had Willie Jones at third, who had been a shortstop, was moved over and became one of the unheralded top third basemen through the 1950s, very consistent player. You had Hamner at short, Mike Goliad at second, who had never played second before. At the end of the 49 season, he'd always been a third baseman. He was moved to second. And you had Waitkus at first, Sisler in left, who had mostly been a first baseman, Ashburn in center, Del Ennis in right, who had a great season also that year. That was the starting lineup. But Seminick had his best year that year and was kind of the heart and soul of the team. And so they came to play the Giants in August. They're leading by 7 or 8 games. And a really famous, one of baseball's more famous fights broke out. It started the day before when Eddie Stanky started playing around and waving his arms while Seminick was at the plate batting. And that drove Seminick nuts. Seminick had a pretty good temper. He was not one who suffered fools gladly and wasn't going to put up with hijinks on the field, and he complained about it. And Sankey had actually started doing this a couple days before against the Braves with Bob Elliott. And Elliott complained, but the umpire said, hey, there's no rule against him doing that. So they felt they couldn't stop him. And Seminick's mood wasn't lightened when he got hit on the elbow by Sal Magli in the next pitch. And so the next day, he's kind of coming already in a mood because his elbow's now really sore, and he's thinking about that. In the meantime, Leo DeRocher had agreed that Stanky would not wave his arms while players were batting until the league ruled on whether that was legal or not. So there was kind of this uneasy truce. Well, Seminick came up and I think he was safe on an error. And then there was a base hit, and he took off. And he was a man on a mission. The Giants were ahead 1-0 at that point. And he was going to third come hell or high water. And he took out the third baseman, Hank Thompson, and knocked him out cold. Uh, and then got up and scored. So 2 runs scored for the Phillies on that play to take a 2-1 lead. So the next time up, um, Seminick, they throw high and inside to Seminick. He swings and misses and lets the bat fly out towards the pitcher's mound and then goes out and retrieves it. I want to look at my notes and get the pitcher right. It was Sheldon Jones. So Hamner doubled, Seminick walked. Then Mike Goliat almost got beamed and then started towards the mound, thought better of it, hit a single and or hit a ground ball. Seminick was going to be forced out. Well, before that, Stanky started waving his arms again, and so he got ejected for doing that during Seminick's at bat. So Seminick gets on. He ends up walking. Then Bill Rigney, who moved over to second from third, he had taken over for Hank Thompson. He moves to second base to take over for Stanky now. And the ground ball is hit to short. Seminick's out by 30 feet. He doesn't care. He takes out Rigney, and they end up in a real free-for-all. Like I said, there's a picture of it in the book. At one point, Rigney says, "He's killing me." Seminick was a lot bigger than Rigney. Rigney started out trying to hit Seminick and then realized he was outmatched. And so in the end, on 2 plays, Seminick took out 3/4 of the New York Giants infield. He took out the third baseman and 2 second basemen in 2 innings. He got ejected as well. But that was one of the big moments in 49. The Phillies ended up winning the game. I think Seminick and Rigney were fined $25 each. Again, it's a different world than it would be today. And Seminick was supposed to attend a kid's birthday party of his fan club's heads, and so he went to that evening, and everything was forgotten. Another big moment, though, for the Phillies. So the Phillies go into September. They have about a 7-game lead. And then things start falling apart about a week in. Simmons is inducted into the military and his unit is activated. So now he's the camp bugler at Camp Atterbury. He's not going to be pitching for the Phillies. Eventually he will get shipped out for the military. Then on consecutive days, Bob Miller, who had started out the season 8-0 as a rookie, and then had hurt his back. He left a day early to travel to Boston, and he hurt his back, and then started favoring his shoulder. Well, his shoulder seized up in a game, and so he was out around the 14th. And the next day, Bubba Church almost loses his eye when Ted Kluszewski hits a line drive back through the box. In fact, Church thought he had lost his eye at first. And so he was out. So all of a sudden, now you're down to Constanti and Roberts were the only people that Eddie Sawyer, the manager, had much faith in. Russ Meyer was also there, but he'd been battling elbow chips all year and kind of been inconsistent. And Ken Heinzelman had won 17 games the year before, a veteran in his mid to late 30s, had only won 1 game to that point. So the Phillies were starting to panic a little bit, and the Dodgers were coming up on them. So the Phillies, they still had a 7.5 game lead with 11 games to go. But they were, but it was interesting. Their pitching, while they were losing pitchers, their pitching wasn't that bad, but their hitting went into a real slump. They'd been shut out 4 times through the end of August. They got shut out 7 times in September alone. Dick Sisler had a wrist problem, but for the most part, it was just a slump. Whether his Sawyer played every game. He didn't use his bench much, and almost the entire team play, almost every starter except for Semenuk, because Stan Lepata would substitute for him at catcher. And Goliad at second, he was kind of in and out offensively, so they would sub him. They brought in Jimmy Bloodworth, a veteran, to play a little bit. But everybody else pretty much played 150 or more games. And so I don't know whether they were on fumes when they got to the end, but they couldn't win the big games and they kept going down and down. The league kept shrinking a little bit. And so finally they had to play the Giants in back-to-back doubleheaders on the 27th and 28th of September. They still had a 5-game lead with 6 games to play, but they'd played a doubleheader a day earlier, so they were playing their third and fourth doubleheaders in 5 days. And with no pitching staff, that really caused, the thinness of the pitching staff that caused a problem. So the first game of the first day of the doubleheader, um, Andy Semenuk is again involved. The Phillies almost pull it out. They're down 7-2, and then they rally, and they actually end up tying the game at 7 in the 8th inning. And but the Giants won the game in the bottom of the ninth when Monty Irvin ended up taking out Semenuk at home, sliding in and actually broke Semenuk's ankle. He didn't know it at the time. Uh, he ended up playing on that ankle all the way through the World Series with Novocaine in a special boot that was developed by the team trainer, Frank Wycheck, who had actually been at the Mayo Clinic and worked with Lou Gehrig during his fatal disease and was really, really ahead of his time. Wycheck was. So that loss, so not only did Irvin score the winning run, meaning that now the lead was down another game, but now their catcher was hobbled. And then they lost the nightcap. And then they lost the next day's doubleheader. So their lead was now they had to play the Dodgers with the lead down to 2 games with 2 to play. And everything went down to that final game of the season, one of the most dramatic games you're ever going to hear about, or anyone has witnessed. The Phillies, they take a 1-0 lead, and then in the 6th inning, Pee Wee Reese hits this ball that lands on a ledge, just on a screen out of reach of the outfielders, spins to a stop, and Del Ennis has to sit there and watch while Pee Wee Reese runs around the bases for an inside the park home run. Later he said, I should have thrown my glove at it because then by ground rule it would have been a triple, but he didn't think about that at the time. And you got to start thinking, what a crazy thing that is. What are the odds we're going to end up pulling this out? And Roberts is pitching that day. That game that Semenuk got hurt, he had been trying for the 5th time to get his 20th win, and it had failed. So this was his 6th try to get his 20th win of the season, to become the first 20-game winner. Curt Simmons had left with 17 wins when he went into the military, and Roberts had 16 at that point. So it goes down to the bottom of the ninth, and Brooklyn gets the first 2 runners on base, and Cal Abrams is on second, and Duke Snider's at the plate, and Snyder lines a shot to center field. And Richie Ashburn was not known for having a tremendous arm. That was his reputation. And so Milt Stock, who ironically had played third base for the Phillies in 1915, their other pennant winner, he was the third base coach for the Dodgers, and he decided to send Cal Abrams, who hadn't played that much that year, but had played a lot the last week of the season. And this was the final day of the season. If the Dodgers won, then they and the Phillies would play a best 2 out of 3. same as what happened the next year when the Dodgers got to play a best two out of three. So, but there were a couple things that Stock had not taken into consideration. One was that uh, the Phillies were playing for a possible bunt, although whether Snyder would have bunted in that situation, but the Dodgers only needed one run to win. So they were playing close to the second base bag. So Abrams couldn't get as big a lead as he normally would have. And then the ball was hit, and so Ashburn was playing extremely shallow, partially to back up if there was a throw to second base. If it got past, it wouldn't be deep. And plus, he tended to play shallow. That's the way he liked to play. And it also, for his arm, kind of mitigated some of the weakness of his arm. And so he was playing even more shallow than usual. And then he got a perfect hop on the ball. And Stock missed all those things, calculated he'd send him anyway. And he was out probably by 15 feet. And afterwards, Bert Schotten would say, Richie Ashburn never threw out anybody. But, I can't blame Milt Stock for that. Well, he should have had better scouting reports because going back to that doubleheader, Ashburn actually thrown out Eddie Stanky in that doubleheader, that first day doubleheader. And this was the fourth time he'd thrown out a player at home. We're not talking about on a relay, a straight throw to home. So maybe he should have had a little better scouting report. I don't know. Anyway, they got out of the inning, and then Dick Sisler hits the 3-run home run with his dad in the stands, George Sisler, who was a scout for Brooklyn. And George would later say, I had 4 sons, and I never thought Dick would be the ball player out of them. But Dick cost his dad some money, a World Series check that day. And Sisler hit the home run. Robin Roberts still had to get through the 10th inning, bottom of the 10th, but he did, and the Phillies went to the World Series, which then was interesting because they got one day off, and then they played 4 games with no days off. And Phillies really didn't have a chance to recover. They used Constanti to open the first game. He had been a starting pitcher before, but had not started a game that year. Showed something different, and he pitched great. 1 run in 8 innings, but the Phillies didn't score and lost 1-0. And then they lost 2-1 and 3-2. And so that meant they had lost 7 straight World Series games by 1 run. The last 4 in 1915 and the first 3 in 1950. And then they fell behind 5-0 in game 4. But then there was a drop fly ball, and all of a sudden they had the tying run at the plate in the 9th inning, but couldn't get the run across, couldn't get any further, any closer, and lost the series. So the series started and was over in 72 hours because there was no off day. So from the 4th to the 7th of October. The question then, a lot of people thought the Phillies, they were young, they were going to continue, that they had a tremendous future, they were going to be dominant, and then it didn't happen. In 51, they were battling the Giants for second place, but the Dodgers are way ahead, as everyone remembers. And there was a point where the Giants came into Philadelphia. It was a year to the day after the big fight with Semenuk and Rigney, and where he'd taken out half of the 3/4 of the Giants outfield. And the Giants came into Philadelphia and were really struggling. Both teams were 14 games behind the Giants. This is mid-August. And after Roberts shut out the Giants in the opener, Stan Baumgartner, the Phillies writer, wrote that Leo DeRocher's men walked back and forth from the field as if they had finished the season in Brooklyn Thursday night. They had no pep, no life, and for the most part swung their bats as if they were merely trying to prevent striking out. Well, the Giants then started on a 16-game winning streak the very next day, with 6 of those wins coming against the Phillies. and the Phillies faded to fifth place. But for the third year in a row, they did play the Dodgers with the National League pennant on the line on the last day of the season. They'd done that in '49 and lost to them, which prevented them going into a playoff with St. Louis. Of course, they did it again in 1950, the last game of the season, preventing going into a playoff. And then in '51, the last day of the season, it was kind of if the Giants won and the Dodgers lost, the Giants were in. If the Dodgers won and the Giants lost, then the uh, Dodgers were in. And then if they both had the same result, then they would have a playoff. And so Philadelphia actually jumped out to a 6-1 lead in that game just about the time that the uh, score was relayed that the Giants had defeated Boston 3-2. So now the Dodgers knew they had to win. And of course, the other interesting thing is it goes extra innings. The Dodgers rally, end up winning it on a Jackie Robinson home run in the 14th, 2 innings after he'd saved the day with a diving stab of a line drive, even though the ball kind of then rolled out from under him, but the umpire ruled he had it long enough. And but all three of those games where they played at the end of the season went extra innings. So not only were they dramatic, were they final games that with the pennant on the line, they were really all three dramatic ball games with the Phillies winning only one of the three. So the Phillies then went through the rest of the '50s, and the question, they didn't really contend after that. They had Robin Roberts, who arguably in the early '50s was, the best, at least right-handed pitcher in baseball, and 6 straight 20-win seasons, pitching over 300 innings every year. They had the core of a great. Their core was young, yet they didn't end up competing. And part of it was the Giants and Dodgers, if you look, they recognized the reality of how the world changed in April 1947 when Jackie Robinson showed up. Phillies are very slow to react to that. They kept doing a lot of the things that they had done in the '40s, going out and signing young talent, but ignoring the fact that the cheapest pipeline of talent was the Negro Leagues, because right or wrong, you didn't end up having to pay anything to the teams to take these players away from their teams. And as a result, Richie Ashburn talked about it later, is that the Giants and Dodgers and Braves and Cardinals were all getting better and we weren't. And all of the moves they made in the '40s, they kept trying to replicate that and it didn't work. And then the farm system was losing money because the economics of baseball changed once television showed up, and also the minor leagues were under a lot of stress, and they were spending a lot of money. They had created this farm system, including, I believe there were 5 franchises at one time that they owned outright, and they were having to pump a lot of money into those teams. And some point to Bob Carpenter, some issues of race there. But whatever the reason, the Phillies, they signed 2 minor leaguers in '52, black minor leaguers, but I'm not sure they actually owned them outright. Then in 1955, they finally brought some black players into the farm system in the low minor leagues, and they didn't bring their first player to the major leagues till 1957. So 10 years after Jackie Robinson, they were the last National League team to integrate. Um, Almost everyone else had done so earlier. By 1954, I think all the other teams in the National League had. I think in the American League, it was still Detroit and Boston had not. And so, it was a combination of things. They were the most stable of the National League teams through the '50s, but they weren't developing new talent, especially on the pitching side. And they traded away some players. Semenuk got traded, Waitkus got traded, Bubba Church. Bob Miller never really recovered. I think he had one good year as a reliever, made a comeback after a couple of years. But none of the other players, until probably the late '50s, they started developing some players. Jack Sanford, of course, went on, pitched very well for the Giants, was one of their products. Don Cardwell was one, although he didn't really do a whole lot with them. It was more after he left. But that was after they actually, when Carpenter gave in and brought in a general manager, yeah, finally in 1954. But they didn't contend again. And the players one by one drifted off. And the last two who were really around were Simmons and Roberts, which I talked about early in the book. I talked about the signing of them, and then the end of the book kind of talks about the end of their careers. And they both kind of had a renaissance. Uh, Simmons ended up being released and joined the St. Louis Cardinals and made a career out of beating the Phillies. I think he had a 19-6 lifetime record against the Phillies, and actually in '64 season that really mirrored what happened to the Phillies in 1950, except they didn't pull out the pennant. They had almost, I think they had a 7-game lead with 12 days left, and but did blow that and did not win the pennant that year. And Simmons beat them a couple of times in September and was one of including a key game 3 or 4 days before the end of the season that really knocked the Phillies backwards. Uh, and so in '64, he finally got to pitch against the Yankees in a World Series after not being able to in 1950. He'd been on furlough. He'd been at the World Series, but hadn't been able to pitch in it, partially because they felt the PR would be bad if he's taking a vacation from the military with all the other soldiers having to stay behind. So he pitched batting practice, but he wasn't activated for any. So 14 years later, he finally does get to pitch against the Yankees and actually gets a World Series ring when they beat them. Roberts uh, continued pitching. He didn't get along. Neither of the pitchers lasted long with Gene Mauch. Uh, Simmons was released pretty early on, a couple of weeks after Mauch took over uh, for Eddie Sawyer's second term as manager of the Phillies. And then Roberts lasted through 1961. He started that season pitching really well. In exhibition season, he had 24 scoreless innings in spring training. But once the season started, it just kind of fell apart. He had started the year before with a 1-7 record and rallied and went about 11-9 the rest of the way. This time he started out 1-7 again and ended up 1-10, and that was it. His last win was actually against the Giants against at Candlestick Park, and that was his last win for the Phillies. He was released by the Phillies, signed with the New York Yankees, and was actually for 1962 and was actually on the active roster for the first week and a half, but didn't play in any games. They had a couple of players who were in a couple of pitchers who were in military service, and they got done with that. And so they released Roberts, and he signed with the Orioles and actually had 3.5 really good seasons with the Baltimore Orioles and became a real. He was Jim Palmer's first roommate, and Palmer still talks about the influence that Roberts had on him. Roberts later was a great influence on Fergie Jenkins, who came up through the Phillies, uh, and Roberts worked with him as well, and he talked about that. And if you ever look at the numbers, look at Robin Roberts' numbers and Fergie Jenkins' numbers. Sometimes, it's eerie how close they are and the types of career they had. They're almost identical. Um, Roberts always he went and pitched for the Astros for a year, went to the Cubs as a pitcher coach, and then tried to make a comeback. He tried to hang on in '67 and come back to the Phillies. He actually pitched in Reading. One of his teammates was Dallas Green, and Dallas Green ended up getting called up. But Green was kind of the player pitching coach at the minor league level. And there's kind of a famous story where they're sitting out in the bus waiting for the players to get on board, and Green noticed that the guys were cleaning up the hotel windows, and he goes, "Hey, pitchers, look up! Be careful, or that'll be you someday." And so Roberts he said he'd pitch till June 15th. He ended up going 5-3. There was no call to have him by any major league team. So he was done at that point. Um, so, the real, all through the 1950s, if you look at Sport Magazine or you look at other writers and things, there was almost a cottage industry of talking about why didn't the Phillies ever repeat? And that there were all sorts of people who just thought they caught lightning in a bottle one year, or the players just got too big a head, or injuries, or everybody was really surprised. And when you really look at the National League between, I think it's between 1947 and 19, let's see, I want to say 59. Other than the Phillies, all the pennants were won by the Braves, Giants, or Dodgers. In the American League, it was the Yankees and Al Lopez won them all for that period of time up to about 64. So, um, but people thought the Phillies would be there, and they never really even made a run at it. And that's, I think, what surprised people. They would have decent stretches. They actually were leading for a little bit in the middle of 57, but faded. And it was kind of funny. They finally got some good young talent in 57, but then all the Whiz kids who were still there had injuries or off years. And so they just could never put it together. So this book is really, the premise of the book is really the idea of how difficult it is to build a winning team, to have a dynasty, and how that window will seem open and closes very quickly, and how many moving parts there are to it. And so that's really kind of that. And as a writer, I just always been fascinated with beginnings and endings. And this is a good story for both. How something's built, and then why doesn't it do it again? Why didn't they become Brooklyn or New York Giants, or the Green Bay Packers or the Chicago Bulls or whatever? They were built to be a team with lasting success. That was the idea. And did they, you know, the debate is, did they get too much success too early? Did they win a year earlier or two than they should have? Was it just everybody had career years or whatever? And you kind of draw your own conclusions. Or was it the issue that they didn't take advantage? Like I said, whether you want to talk about race or not, the fact they didn't take advantage of the cheapest pipeline of talent while other teams around them were doing that. That's one of the big factors in my mind. But again, I kind of leave it up to you to decide. So that's kind of the story of the book, with kind of trying to put a little emphasis on the New York Giants part of it a little more than I normally would. So with that, I guess I'm open to questions.
Dennis, excellent job. Dennis, first thing, again, here is the book. How the Whiz Kids, how the 1950 Phillies took the pennant, lost the World Series, and changed Philadelphia baseball forever. Where could somebody pick this up?
Anywhere you buy books. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, direct from the publisher, which is University of Nebraska Press. I really want to shout out people who gave me help. Robert Warrington, who's a big Philadelphia baseball historian. He really looked at some of the early parts of the manuscript. And then C. Paul Rogers, who co-authored a couple of books with Robin Roberts. One is biography, and the other an excellent um, oral history of the Whiz Kids. Pick it up if you can. And then there was some great the Saber oral history. I also recommend that. There were a lot of great interviews there of players who were gone. Unfortunately, by the time I'm really working on the book, all the players were gone. But they're still living there, and so all of those things were very valuable.
I got two quick questions for you. Where and who dubbed them the Whiz Kids, and why?
So it really came in spring training of 1950. The Phillies went through this period of time when the Carpenters first took over the team in 1944. They were looking to change the team image, and they actually had a contest that resulted in the team being called the Blue Jays. And so you'll see, I actually have a button that was put out that has a Philly insignia but a Blue Jay perched on it, because there was Johns Hopkins University also had the Blue Jays, and the students objected there. There wasn't a great there wasn't great acceptance of the change, and so they kind of coexisted as names for a while. But by 1949, that really wasn't working, and they had felt the need to rebrand because, as I said, the Phillies didn't have a great reputation, no real success. Um, there are a lot of derisive stories. You had Hugh Mulcahy, who's their pitcher, whose uh, nickname was Losing Pitcher because that's what he was known most at in newspapers, and Boom Boom Beck, who that was the sound of the ball hitting off the big tin sign in right field, and so players would hit balls. So they didn't have a great reputation. So they were trying to change that reputation. So by 49, they were going back to Phillies. And uh, there was a University of Illinois basketball team in the early 40s led by Andy Hansen that was called the Whiz Kids. And so that was kind of out there. I wouldn't say it was directly because of that, but I think it was just there was a point where Bob Carpenter was talking about, I don't think Blue Jays or Phillies fit us. So we're more of the fighting Phillies or the Whiz Kids. And fighting Phillies, you'll see if you look at 50, it's kind of interchangeable, which was used more. Over time, Whiz Kids is really, although they still use fighting Phillies sometime today. But Whiz Kids and fighting Phillies was sort of both used. But historically, they've always kind of been called the Whiz Kids. And maybe because it refers really to that singular team and those players who were part of that team, where fighting Phillies has been used kind of off and on over time.
And the last question I have, and you might have answered it by saying they were finally good, but the last part of your title of the book, and changed Philadelphia baseball forever. What
The
are you trying
athletics had,
to say? That is that what you're trying to say, or is
yeah, the athletics had been the face of Philadelphia baseball. Connie Mack was the face of Philadelphia baseball. He'd had all the success. The Phillies had none. The Phillies had moved into the athletic stadium. Baker Bowl uh, had actually had collapses, one of which killed over a dozen people over time. It was an older ballpark and wasn't really kept up. And so they actually, in 1938, they moved down the street into Scheid Park. So they rented from the Athletics. They, the Athletics were the team that had all the great players, the Jimmy Fox, Lefty Grove, and had Mickey Cochran and had all the success. By the 40s, that was changing. And the Phillies, at a time when you were losing the two team cities, Boston, St. Louis, Philadelphia, still had Chicago and New York, but the cities that weren't really big enough to support two, one of them was going to have to go. And I think the Phillies finally had an owner in the Carpenters who had money and could support the team and invest in it. By that time, the Macs were kind of out of money and were not able to invest. And I think if things had changed and it had been another time, if the Whiz Kids had not come along, the Athletics might have found a way to survive. And it might have been the Phillies that had moved because they didn't have a stadium. And if Bob Carpenter had decided, I'm not as crazy about this as I thought. He was a very young, he was 27 when he took over as owner. And so I think they really changed it almost to a National League town from an American League town and really took over. I mean, they are one of the most rapidly followed franchises in baseball today. And that certainly wasn't the case before then. Both teams were kind of looked down on. So
thank you, Dennis, so much. Steve, you're up.
Dennis, thanks for your presentation. I look forward to the next one with my group. It's a little different. You don't have to emphasize the Giants because it's not a Giants group. I think I shared an email with you that my sports book club, we read your book and we reviewed it, and everybody loved it. You alluded to Ferguson Jenkins and Robin Roberts. Ferguson Jenkins used to live in the next community to where I am, and he came and made presentations several times. The first time he was there, and I try to give a trivia question, give out a prize, et cetera, et cetera. So the question was, which starting pitcher has given up the most home runs? And the answer happened to be Robin Roberts.
Yeah.
So Jenkins was sitting there waiting to speak, and very politely he said, "Can I ask a question? Can I answer something?" I said, "Sure, you're our guest." He says, "I was the second." So
Yeah, like I said, they were very similar. They had the same issues where they gave up a lot of home runs,
brought it to mind.
great
The other question
control.
I have,
Yeah,
some of the guys in my group remember the Whiz Kids, and one guy in particular, I think you answered the question, and I questioned him, is from Chicago, and he knew the Wakis story and so on. Did Eddie Wakis ever get together with Ruth, whatever her name is, at a bar or something? Was there a
no,
connection before? I
no,
said to him, I don't think that happened. But
no.
in Chicago.
She had never met him.
Okay, so you'll bring that up.
She'd only seen him at the ballpark as a ball player.
Okay.
The book talks a little bit about the Bobby Soxers phenomenon of the 1940s and how there was a dangerous tinge to it. Now, she was crazier than most of them, but it was, if you've seen the Beatles in the 60s, it wasn't really a groupie thing. It was a little different. And there was the players felt danger from it to an extent, and especially after what happened to Waitkus. But no, he never knew her before, never knew her after.
All right. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. Mars, you're up.
Well, thank you, Dennis, for joining us. That was very interesting. I have a couple of comments and questions. One was since Detroit and Philadelphia had large Black populations migrating from the South, a lot of great jazz musicians like Dizzy Gillespie and Thelonious Monk. I believe, not Monk, but I know Gillespie and the Heath Brothers, famous jazz musicians, were from Philadelphia. And Detroit, the migration from the South to work in the auto industry. So it's kind of surprising that those cities integrated so late. And the other comment is, I think Jim Constanti wound up pitching for the Yankees in the mid-50s, didn't he?
He did. He had one really good season for them. I think he went 7-2 and had a pretty good ERA. And he was known as a guy that Casey Stengel would talk about. He comes into a game, it's like he's going down to the corner to get a newspaper, not a care in the world. He was really, you didn't ruffle him. That was one of his strengths. But yeah, he did go to the Yankees.
And the question I have, so we had the Baker Bowl. Was that named after the Phillies owner?
Yes, William Baker. It was actually built in 1895, so it was called National League Park before then.
And didn't
their
Home
previous
Run
home burned
Baker?
down, and then they built that, and then it became known as the Baker Bowl, not just Baker Bowl. Shortly after William Baker took over the team.
And didn't Home Run Baker have the home run record at Baker Bowl, the
He
Major League
might
home run?
have. Well, let's see. No, he would have played at Shibe Park.
Oh, okay.
He was in the Athletics.
Shy Park. Well, Baker, I thought Home Run Baker was from the turn of the 20th century.
No, he's a little later.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
I mean, he was like 19.
15, 14.
No, he was like the 19 teens into the early 20s.
okay. Thank you very much, Dennis.
I did want to comment, you were talking about Philadelphia as the relationship with blacks in Philadelphia. Philadelphia always had a difficult reputation, and the Phillies' reputation was such that the scouts would actually complain in the 50s that they had trouble signing black players, and it persisted all the way, if you remember, Curt Flood not wanting to play there. So,
Well, also Mayor Rizzo in the 1960s was a racist.
He was,
yeah,
you're right.
So it had
Thank
a
you,
long,
Mars.
long history. So,
Dan Taylor, you are up.
Thanks, Gary. Dennis,
yeah, someone mentioned Ben Chapman too. I think yes,
Ben
obviously,
Chapman,
that's a
right.
famous. That's a famous chapter, and it is talked about in the book. So,
Jackie Robinson, yeah.
yeah. I'm
Dan,
sorry
go
I
ahead.
interrupted you.
No problem.
Dan.
Dennis, thanks for doing this. Great stuff. I enjoyed this. A question relating to the signings of Simmons and Roberts. A lot of teams back at that time a small handful of teams, I should say, were splashing some big money at trying to sign bonus players. The Braves probably the most. The Pirates had the famous Paul Pettit signing for $100,000, and none of them, for the most part, none of them really panned out. And the team that did seem to have success with their bonus signings was the Phillies, with Simmons and Roberts and a few others. Is there any? You ever put your finger on a reason for that? Was there somebody, a particular scout or somebody in the front office that was really good at identifying players?
Well, there were a couple things about and I don't know whether these are the big factors. One thing that was different about the Phillies is that when Herb Pennock put this together, they brought in good farm system people, good scouts, and they had coaches that weren't like just the friend of the manager. They brought in coaches who could teach. And so they really did work with players, which really wasn't done a whole lot back then. And then, like I said, even their trainer, he was really advanced in training for the time. And so I don't know whether that was part of it, whether they just knew how to develop players when they had talent, or whether it was just luck, is serendipitous that they just signed a couple of great players right away who had tremendous ability. But they did stick with Simmons. If you look, I mean, they complained a lot about because of the bonus rules at the time, if they when they signed them to that level, they had to keep them in the major leagues for 2 years or they could lose them. And so Simmons really struggled in 48 and 49. And there were people wanting to give up on him. And Cy Perkins, who was the pitching coach, said, "Don't. You know, he's got it. He's just got to put it together." Because again, he started. He was 18 when he broke in, and when he pitched that game against the New York Giants, he was 18 years old. So he's still only 21 at the beginning of the 1950. He was maybe 20 at the beginning of the season and turned 21 during it. And so they were patient then, but they ran into the same problem. They had Tom Qualters, who didn't make it. They had a couple other guys that they signed. Mac Burke was a guy that they signed, ended up becoming an NFL official, I think, in the Super Bowl. And Fred Van Dusen was another guy they signed out of upstate New York, who was going to be the best prospect ever. And that's what I mean by they kept doing that and ignored the Negro leagues to their detriment, because you could get established players who you knew were professionals. And there were misses they had in the 40s, but they had enough hits that but why? I mean, gee, if you had the answer to that, then you could answer all the mysteries of why players make it. So baseball's such a funny sport, guys, that you don't know. I was a big fan of Jordan Walker with the Cardinals and watched him the first couple of years. And I'm like, he pulls off the pitch. I don't know. And now look at him. Now, is this a hot month or is this really a turnaround? You just don't know. Baseball's a difficult sport, I think.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. Bill Klink.
Thank you, Gary. And Dennis, I'm looking forward to your presentation out here in Surprise. I'll be there in person, and
okay.
As Steve would say in the 62 playoffs, Dark said, "Well, I brought Willie Mays with me." Well, I'm bringing a seat from Connie Mack Stadium.
Oh, okay.
There's a story behind that. I've been married 54 years, and I can admit, I'll tell you proudly to all of you guys and gals, I've never cheated on my wife in 54 years. I've been a Giants fan as long as I can remember, but I do have to admit that I did have an affair. I had an affair with the Phillies in the mid 60s, partially precipitated by my love of Connie Mack Stadium, which I think was just such a beautiful park in a crappy area. But, it was, and of course the 64 Phillies. But I just fell in love with them. And in 64, the Giants made the mistake of firing Al Dark. And I was bitter. And, on the rebound, I picked up the Phillies.
Okay.
Even went so far as editing their their fan club newspaper in 68 and 69. I went overboard. Then I saw the light, and the affair ended, and I came back to the Giants. So guys, please forgive me. That was then. But I lead that to 64. And here's the question, and I want you to think back of the players on that 50 team, the starting pitchers and all the position players. And you probably know just as well those starting pitchers and position players on the 64 Phillies. Now, I'm of the opinion, I'd like to hear yours, in spite of what happened in 64, I think man for man, position by position, and certainly starting pitcher, I think the 64 Phillies were way better than the 50 Phillies. Your
Yeah,
thoughts?
I wouldn't necessarily argue that. I think Dick Allen was probably the best player on either team.
Oh, yeah.
And then, but what was eerily similar is you get to the end of the year,
Oh, yeah.
again, you have a manager who only has faith in two pitchers, and then everything just kind of goes wrong. Whiz game, and
The steal of
you know,
home. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just like anything that could go wrong did go wrong,
Right.
and that was just kind of eerie how similar it was. And then to have Simmons be one of the guys who had played a big role in shutting the door on him
Oh, yeah.
was interesting. But again, a batting slump, and you're down to I don't have faith in any of the other pitchers, and with Sawyer in 50, it was Constanti and Roberts, and it was Short and Bunning in 64. But yeah, I don't think I disagree with that. There was a lot of talent. That 64 Phillies team had a lot of talent, and again, it didn't repeat.
No,
It
it
wasn't
didn't.
until it was another decade and a half before they really became a
Mid
serious
70s. Yeah.
team.
Before they did anything. The other observation I made when I look back on it, I can't imagine a team that managed to when you think of a team getting swept in the World Series, you say, man, they got wiped out. No, this team was not wiped out.
No, it was a
They
great
scored
World Series.
11 runs in 4 games. If
Mhm.
you, you know, typically, if you hold the other team to 11 runs in 4 games,
Mhm.
you've got to figure you're going to win one or two of those games. They
Right.
managed to lose every single game. I don't know if there's ever been a team that got swept in the World Series and only gave up 11 runs.
I
Usually, they're
yeah.
blown out. I don't know if there's any way to quantify that unless you look back at every
All of the
sweep
games
in the
were
series.
really good games.
Yeah,
And one hit here or there would have changed the whole picture. And I'm sure that had to make it even more frustrating. But, they all thought, hey, we'll get another chance.
you think they ran out of steam physically, because of that last week of the season, that they just didn't have it to face the Yankees? I mean, physically, mentally, they were just, in the dumper.
Well, Dick Sisler kind of said that he felt they didn't have time to catch their breath. They went right from the drama of those last 2 weeks of the season and the mental strain. Sometimes we think about the physical when we forget the mental strain of playing every day and having that pressure, and then go right from there to the World Series. Um, so I got to think that had an impact. If they could have had another day off, I think if they could have activated Simmons, that would have made
Oh, yeah.
some difference. But again, they didn't hit. Of course, the Yankees didn't hit either.
No,
So
11 runs in 4 games. That's terrible.
yeah, it was one, and five of those in the last game. So only
Yeah,
six in the first three.
yeah.
And you'd think Constanti, what a brilliant
One to
move that
nothing.
was that
Yeah.
Sawyer made, and it was 1 run in 8 innings. He doesn't get the win out of it though. It's like they would make good moves, and it just didn't pan
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank
very much for allowing me the catharsis in front of everyone of admitting to my dalliance and, cheating on my team.
There is
I'm
some
back with the Giants forever.
Bill,
there is
I'm glad you came out of the darkness.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
did. I came over from the dark side. Yeah.
there is
Or in
some
this case, the
stories.
red side.
There is an account of that last day in Connie Mack Stadium in 1970 in the book. So
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Mr. Mike Walsh,
crazy.
you are up.
There's the ticket stub last time.
But were you there for that?
No, I bought it. I did go to the first game at Veterans Stadium, and I did not witness the first home run hit by Don Money because I was, as we would say as Giants fans, I was in the wand.
Okay.
Mike,
My
go ahead,
wife,
Mike.
my future
Okay.
wife saw the first home run.
Well, people who, if you don't know, basically the fans tore the stadium apart.
Oh yeah.
So there's some good stories. I don't want to spoil the stories. I want you to read about it, but there's good
There's
stories.
the stadium in
Oh,
its
yeah.
destructive mode.
Hey, Dennis.
Yeah.
Yeah, enjoyed the presentation. I will definitely be trying to pick up a copy and put it on my reading list. I've also got a book about the '64 Phillies that I haven't read yet, so it'll have to go probably after that. I read them in order, but I will get to it. It's a fascinating story. By the way, you mentioned the Fightin' Phillies name. That's the current name of their Double-A team, by the way.
Oh, is it really?
It's the Reading Fightin' Phils. It's the
Okay.
Phils, not the Phillies. The Fightin' Phils.
Okay.
That's their official name. And I don't know if everybody here knows, Reading is about 75 miles northwest of Philly.
And the last place Robin Roberts pitched.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Yeah. Interesting. Did you? I assume you've heard the name the Whiz Kids.
Yes.
That was that's what the '83 Phillies were known as the Whiz Kids because they were very old.
Yeah, Morgan and Rose.
A lot of players, almost the whole team were in their 30s. Half of them were in their late 30s, and they made it to the World Series. So, the columnists at the Daily News started calling them the Whiz Kids, and when they made it to the World Series, the national media picked it up a little bit. But the '66 Phillies were also called the Whiz Kids.
Oh, I didn't know
by
that.
the same columnists at the Daily News, because the '66 Phillies were desperate for pitching, and they added a lot of old players. In fact, they traded Ferguson Jenkins for a couple of old pitchers, Larry Jackson and I can't remember the other guy's name. The other guy was actually 37. Larry Jackson was 35 when they traded Ferguson Jenkins. And Larry Jackson had a great season for them in '66, of course. But they added lots of players to their team in '66 that were in their mid-30s. In fact, they turned over half the roster in '66, and most of them were in their mid-30s. So they were the original Whiz Kids, really. And then, again, the name was dredged up again in '83. But have you seen much video online of the '50 Phillies? I was just kind of curious. Is there much out there?
There's some on YouTube.
Yeah, a little bit.
You can find some stuff on the Whiz Kids. Yeah, not a lot, but some game stuff.
I assume most people know that Richie Ashburn became a great television commentator for the Phillies for like 45 years or something like that. So he's a beloved figure, probably more for his television work than his necessarily his playing days. But I
Don't
think
they have Ashburn Alley out there?
Ashburn Alley, yeah. Oh my God, yeah. He was great. He was really good as the color commentator, basically, on television, and along with Harry Callis was the play-by-play guy.
Yeah.
So he had a great, funny personality, and people loved it. Now he was drafted, I think, by the expansion Mets, wasn't he? Is that what happened to Ashburn at the end of his Phillies career?
He was sold to the Mets, yeah.
Sold to the Mets? Okay, yeah.
And he ended his career.
Sad way for him to leave Philly.
His last at bat, he got on base and he was erased on a triple play.
No kidding.
And
Wow.
Casey Stengel, he always talked about it. The book does talk about Ashburn as an announcer a little bit. And he talked about that game. All the Mets came in the dugout after the last game, and Casey Stengel told them, "Hey, fellas, don't feel bad about this. No one person could have done all this."
Good line.
Casey Stengel had some funny things to say about those early Mets teams. Yeah, and Ashburn, by the way, was a great bunter.
He was, and he was a great center fielder. If you look at his stats, they're right up there with Mays and all those. He
For his
still holds
defensive
some
stats.
records, outfield records for putouts and things like that. He was he's a very underrated outfielder, I think.
Hey, and he's in the Hall of Fame, right?
He is.
Yep.
He is.
Yep.
Thank you,
Yep.
Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Met,
Gary,
Greg, you're up, and then Norm, you'll take us home. Greg, go ahead.
Thanks, Gary. Hello, Dennis.
Hello.
Enjoyed your presentation. I feel the need to this is of no help to anybody, but to point out that Robin Roberts was the coach of my college baseball team. I interviewed him once and was
Oh,
very
down in Florida?
happy to guess. University of
Oh,
South Florida in Tampa
okay.
many years ago. Wanted to cycle back to Connie Mack Stadium, aka Shibe Park, just because that next to the Polo Grounds, it's the stadium I always wished I could have visited. I only saw a little bit of it on TV when I was a little kid. I was wondering if you had any impressions of during this period of the Whiz Kids, how Shibe Park, or by then might have been called Connie Mack Stadium, how it was perceived locally, how it was perceived, by opponents. Is there any way that it could have? I realize almost every stadium except Wrigley and Fenway from that era was doomed eventually. Some lasted longer than others. From everything I've ever read and seen of it, I've always wished it could have lived. And it could have had that kind of cachet a la Fenway. Just whether it's personal or historical, there are some impressions you can share of the ballpark.
Well, I mean, it was a state-of-the-art ballpark when it was built, and you know, it, when you compared it to Baker Bowl, I mean, Baker Bowl, I think someone wrote in 1937. There was a guy who did kind of a review of all the ballparks in at least the National League, might have been all the major leagues. And he got to Baker Bowl and he said, well, the one improvement they've made is they've taken all the rusty nails that the guys hung their uniforms on and replaced them with shiny new ones. And that was about it for what he could say. And they had sheep and sheep manicuring the grass in the ballpark. This is in the 1930s. I think Shibe Park, it didn't have lights till 39. It was really the Phillies moving there that allowed them to do that, because then they charged rent. And I think that tells you that coming out of the Depression and with the Macs only having the ball team as their source of revenue, that there wasn't a whole lot they could do to keep up the ballpark. And by the early 50s, I mean, when the Athletics moved, he was Bob Carpenter was kind of forced to buy the stadium, and at that time he really wanted to build a new one, and there was a proposal by Jack Kelly, who's Grace Kelly's father, who had almost bought the Phillies 10 years earlier, to build a new ballpark, but it just didn't materialize until finally Veterans Park. So I think it was a beautiful ballpark when it was built, but I think it was seeing its age by the 50s and lack of money to be put into it. By that time, the Macs had sold even a lot of the rights to the food, the concessions, and things like that, which most Connie's income towards the end was coming from out of concessions. They finally had to mortgage that to try to stay afloat. So I don't think there was much they could put in the ballpark by then.
And I guess they also had a neighborhood issue a la the Polo
Yeah.
Grounds.
Right. And they also, I know early on, Mac built a high fence because he had the same thing at Wrigley where people were watching the game for free and he didn't like that. So he put a stop to that at one point. So
White fence. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Greg, I'll put it in perspective from the games I saw there. I have a picture from right field taken of Johnny Callison that I later had autographed. In that photo, you see the light, a light for the stands. There is no dome on it. It's a bare light hanging by a single wire. This is a Major League Baseball park. That's the lighting system they had for the fans.
and
Pretty
Carpenter,
bad.
when he had to take over that team, he said he was not going to put money into it. He wasn't happy that he kind of ended up with it because Arnold Johnson, who bought the Athletics, owned it and had to give it up because he also owned Yankee Stadium, and he partially had to give it up because there's a conflicts, but also he had to give it up because he needed that money to buy the Athletics. And so there was no play, if he was going to stay in Philadelphia, that was the only stadium. And so he kind of got stuck with it. And he at first he put a little bit of money in it later in the 50s and early 60s, but not a lot as you saw, just enough to keep it open, I think.
Thanks. David, we'll let you go after Norm, then you'll wrap it up. Norm, you're up.
All right. Dennis, thank you so much for your presentation. Very informative. I just have two comments. And one is I just bought a 1953 Topps Willie Jones baseball card.
Oh, wow.
And on the card, it has the logo Fighting Phillies.
Okay.
And so I thought that was pretty cool.
Now that you say that, I remember that's on there.
And Mike Walsh brought something up that is Giant related. So I thought I would bring it up also. And that is those 1966 Whiz kids. Two Giants are involved with that.
Right.
First baseman, New York Giant, SF Giant Bill White. And shortstop, Dick Groat, who ended his career with the Giants.
And Jackie Brandt.
Was he in the 66?
Brandt. Yeah. Brandt was on the 66 Phillies.
So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. Bill, that's your buddy, by the way, Bill.
David, he and I are corresponding.
David, take us home.
Yes, Gary, thank you very much for having me. My son married Barry Cutler's daughter, and he's been a Giant fan forever. I live in Philadelphia. I've been involved with the Phillies since the 1950 World Series when I was 8 years old. And the one thing I think about the Phillies, and Dennis, I've read your book, the Phillies, correct me if I'm wrong here, have lost more games than any other professional team of any sort. And I'd like to say that over the years, whether it was Shy Park or on, I've been to many of those games. Excuse me. The book was terrific. When I was a youngster, I said, damn it, Ashburn, you've got Mays you're competing with in center field, and you've got Snyder. And damn it, you're not making the All-Star game. No. And Richie, by the way, somebody alluded to Richie's, he was a fabulous tennis player and a fabulous squash player. Coming from Oklahoma, I'm not sure where he learned, but maybe it was his abilities. I will tell you, in my case, my uncle took me to the polo ground, and Ebbets Field. And I think I sent it to Gary, a picture of me in my room when I was 10 years old with a big New York Giants baseball pennant, and then pictures of my baseball cards of players that you probably have been talking about all along. Robin Roberts was my favorite. Robin, as Dennis talked about, he went to Michigan State, and he was basically signed as a basketball player because he was a terrific basketball player, right. And then went on, obviously, to pitch. And he never. The one thing about Roberts is you don't see this too much anymore. He was afraid of hitting Buddy, so he threw the ball pretty much over the plate. And therefore, he had very few hit batsmen, but a lot of home runs, as was talked about. Roberts was after Kiner as the representative of the National League, I believe, before Marvin came in and turned baseball on its head. A very smart guy, a little pig-headed sometimes, as was noted, because he thought he could pitch forever, like... what's his name from our outfield now figures he'll play till 40. A couple more things. I do remember the Philadelphia A's, and the Philadelphia A's, I felt probably should have stayed, and the Phillies should have gone somewhere else, because they did win, I believe, Dennis, 5 World Series. Am I correct?
Yeah.
The Philadelphia A's. And Connie Mack, whose real name is Consuelo McElhenney. And correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't know how he did this. He managed, with a suit on, from the roof of the dugout Now that sounds impossible, but I think it can be confirmed to be the case. And the other thing is, you mentioned Willie Jones. I guess I was 12 years old, and I demanded my parents take me down to see this spring training. Don Newcombe pitched. Newcombe, great pitcher. I should add that he started the employee assistant program for Major League Baseball because he was an alcoholic. And it's going on. Dickie Knowles now ran it too. He's the one who decked George Brett so that the Phillies could win the World Series a while back. And anyway, my father was a physician, and Don Newcombe hit Willie Jones in the head. No, he had a baseball cap on, and took him. Back then, you didn't have a doctor or physician like you do there necessarily at the spring training games. So he helped take him over to the hospital and so on. And it was a few years later when Warren Giles, Bill Giles' father, who implemented in the National League helmets. Now, I'm not sure, and maybe somebody knows this more than me, and I'll close. In hockey, for instance, they grandfathered people in like Gordie Howe and so on. I don't know the story with if you were a player and you'd played a while, did you have to go along with that until anybody know anything about that? Or not really? They obviously in the 50s. Go ahead. Thank you.
By the way, I think his name was.
I think I remember Tony Taylor not wearing a helmet for some reason on the Phillies. Maybe I was wrong. I was a young kid.
Mays refused to wear one for a while too.
I think Connie Mack's name was
He was a
Cornelius,
liner.
not Consuelo.
I was going to say that.
Yeah,
Cornelius
David Consuelo
McGillicuddy.
was your high school prom date. Connie Mack was Cornelius McGillicuddy.
Cornelius
Deadly
McGillicuddy.
exchanged.
David, when you were talking, I saw Frank Collins shaking his. Frank, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say the same thing. His real name was Cornelius McGillicuddy, and the sports writers shortened it to Connie Mack for print space in the newspapers.
Right.
And I don't know about him managing from the roof of the dugout, but because he wore civilian clothes, he did not wear a uniform. He was not allowed on the field. And that's why the statue down at the stadium has him with a scorecard in his hand, because he used to position his players with the scorecard.
Yeah. And his grandson was the senator from Florida.
Yes.
I think, yes,
Yeah.
right.
That's true.
Connie Mack, right.
Yes.
Fabulous presentation. Let's give it up for Dennis.
Dennis.
Dennis again. Here's the book, The Whiz Kids.
Connect with.
Get it on Amazon, local bookstores, whatever. And we wish you much success, Dennis.
Thank you.
And
next week, Dennis.
Thanks, Dennis. Good to
27th.
see you
good
again.
luck next week.
See you
We
on-
will
see you on
reconvene
the
next
26th.
Tuesday with David Krell. If you guys want to hang for a little bit and talk Giant baseball. My favorite all-time game, Mike Walsh. Sorry, was the 2010 Game 6 Giants-Phillies. Apologies. Anyway, be well, guys.
See you
Have
all.
a great night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
The stigma with the